Հանուն Հոր եւ Որդվո եւ Օգվույն Սրբո Amen. Dear brothers and sisters, today is the fifth Sunday after the feast of the Exaltation that we celebrated a couple weeks ago. And today we have an interesting reading from the Gospel of Saint Mark, where Jesus says, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." Now, a couple of days ago, I was reading an article where the author was saying that the greatest villain in all the movies in the 20th century has been undoubtedly the Joker. The Joker, who is an interesting figure and character in the Batman movies, where he's always doing something opposite to the truth, opposite to goodness, opposite to humanity. And he has all kinds of problems that show up during the movies. Now, if you read the 4 Gospels, you will notice quickly that the villain of the 4 Gospels are most of the time the scribes and the Pharisees, those who are always in trouble. Jesus is always criticizing them. Jesus is always telling his followers, "Hey, do not follow them. Do not do what they are doing." And in today's reading, Jesus does the same. He again brings 2 figures in order to make a contrast and ask his followers to follow the one that he likes and recommends. Today's kind of subject is what we see in the words that Jesus uses in denouncing the lifestyle of the scribes. It's the word hypocrisy. We don't like this word because the people who have hypocrisy are usually the ones who aren't liked a lot by the society. But unfortunately, this is a plague, a disease that you can find anywhere that you go. Not only that, if you open your TVs or if you read your newspapers, you will see this subject everywhere. People are talking about it. The politicians, the clergymen, the recent scandals in the Catholic Church. This lifestyle of double faces, or the double lifestyle. One of it is in front of everyone. You see these kind of people, and then in their secret lives, they are totally something else. So you see the smiles on their faces, you see the nice words that come out of their mouths, but inside of them there is something wrong going on. If they are helping other people, for example, they are not doing it in order to show their love, but they are doing it in order to make a show and say, hey, look at us, what we are doing here. If they are praying and attending church and doing the things that they are supposed to do as Christians, they are doing it not because of their beliefs, but in order to come and say, hey, look at us, we are here, we are better than others. And those people who do not come and do not do things like we do are not good people. They are going to be condemned. They are not going to be accepted. So Jesus saw all of this in the scribes, because that's what they were doing. They were pretending to be the holy moly people at their time, but in reality, they were very bad and evil people. And Jesus, seeing all of that, he couldn't keep it to himself. But when the opportunity came, he denounced them. He said, do not follow these people. And this is what today's gospel reading shows us. That true, Jesus denounces the worst example, the evil example. But on the other hand, he also praises the good example that we see in our reading. The widows. Jesus puts a contrast between the scribes and the widows, and says that the widows who didn't have anyone at the time to take care of them, the widows who needed every single penny that they had, one of them, as Jesus was sitting in front of the treasury, came and she put all she had, everything, to the temple. That was something that was very valuable for her, because the penny was all she had, and she could have starved. She could have not had a good life. But instead of thinking about her, she brought that to the temple. Now, we have heard lots of sermons about this subject, that this story is about the rich versus the poor. What the rich people give, well, they must give more than that. What the poor people are already doing. But today I want you to think about this story in a different way. We must see, first of all, the contrast between the scribes, who were living double lives, and the widow, who was reflecting in her actions what was already inside her. And that was her faith. That was her love. That was her commitment. Because she was told as a believer that she had to contribute. And instead of saying to herself, yes, I know the commandment, but since I can't give away my penny, I'm going to keep it for myself. She brought it and she put it in the treasury. Unlike the scribes, who weren't following the commandments truly from their inside. They were doing things only from outside to show to people how devoted they were. But in reality, they were the worst people, even though they were educated. A scribe was a person who knew the law of God, who knew the commandments, who knew the Bible, very well. That was his job to do, to read it, to meditate, and to reflect upon it. And yet, in this story, Jesus tells us that it doesn't matter how much you know, it doesn't matter how much you do. At the end, if your inside isn't like your outside, you will receive the greater condemnation. But the question that we have is, can we really live lives where our inside and outside values are parallel to each other? Unfortunately, it is very difficult, to not say impossible, to live lives like this. Because sometimes we are very afraid from what people will say if we don't go and do some things in order to satisfy them. But we might not be convicted from our inside. And so we prefer to deceive others. We prefer to look nice to others and do some things that we are not convinced of doing them. But today our greatest example, again, Jesus, shows up and teaches us how to do that. The scribes didn't like him. The scribes were against him. Jesus could have easily said, "Oh, scribes, you are very good people. You are great examples to others." If Jesus thought about getting their approval, receiving their approval. But instead of doing that, Jesus was courageous and brave enough to confront them and say what he was already thinking about them from his inside, by denouncing them and denouncing their activities. And on the other hand, he was brave enough to praise the life and the person or the character of a person who was neglected. The widow. What was the value of a widow in the first century? Nothing. But Jesus, because his inside and outside values were parallel to each other, he praised her. And he said, indirectly, this is your example. This is an example to follow and to learn from. Be like her and do not be like the scribes. Today, my dear brothers and sisters, we are invited through this story to always remember that inside each of us we have the character of the scribe who wants to live a double life, wants to be double-faced, and also the longing to be like the widow, to be honest, to be the person according to God's heart. Let's try to focus on the widow inside each one of us and live lives that bring glory to God. Be brave enough to not satisfy any human person and any human expectations, but instead follow the commandments of God, and with that have the glory of God in our lives here and then, now and always, forever and ever. Amen.